Hi, I'm Dr. Ed Kita, and I'm here to welcome you to the course. Now, don't let the word course upset you. I mean, there's no exams or quizzes or certifications or diplomas. It's just the way we're going to present the information. And the main point you want to get from that word, course, is that you start at the beginning and you work your way through the entire course. What you don't want to do is what everybody does, and that's cherry pick information. Everybody has a word or a term or a diagnosis that they think concerns them directly, and they will spend a lot of time researching it and finding people in that same situation with that same label. And the information rarely changes, right? So we want to change that around, and that's why we encourage you to start at the beginning and work your way through. And we also encourage you to go back and review stuff as you go. In the world of healthcare, diagnosis is a big deal, right? They spend a lot of time, money, and effort teaching it. Lay people and patients really want that word. They want to know what is going on with them. And the problem is that when you're teaching in the context of education, you have to have a uniformity of how you teach. So you teach in black and white, right? And what you find out, that's how diagnosis is. It's black and white. It's a textbook. You go to that name thing and you see all the criteria for it. But in actuality, I mean, diagnosis is this murky shade of gray when you get out into the field. It's sort of rare to find a textbook presentation of anything, especially in the pain world, and that's what leads to a lot of problems. People get married to a diagnosis and they don't diverge from it, and practitioners do the same thing. They will treat according to the textbook without diverging from that. So what we're going to do in the course is start by focusing in on pain, right? And we're using pain because it permeates everything. It's that primary thing that forces people to go get help. And if you go to chronic pain support group meetings, you'll find pain described as a ghost, some mysterious fog. There's always that mysterious connotation to it. So if we can sort that out, if we could figure out pain in sort of a rational way, we could use the ghost of pain to demystify the murky gray of diagnosis. And once we do that, we'll have a course that starts nowhere in particular, but ends up going everywhere. And where it starts and where it ends depends on you, and it depends on your particular circumstances. Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to build a puzzle, right? And like every puzzle, every time you find a piece, you examine it and you put it into the puzzle, it stays there, right? So we don't look at things scattershot. We keep adding to this puzzle, and once we get enough puzzle pieces in, you're going to realize that what we're building is a map. And then all you have to do is find your place on it. And then you have a way of determining what direction you want to move and how you want to get home. And home is getting your health back, and that's the whole point. So it's sort of hard to explain how we're going to actually do that. So what we're going to do is introduce you to the board, and then we'll sort of go on from there. Just give me a second. All right, this is the board. This is where we're going to be doing all our lectures. And just like we alluded to, we're going to build it up like a puzzle, right? And the key thing when you think about a puzzle is whenever you find a piece that fits, you leave it on the board. You never take it off so you don't leave information behind. And every piece adds color or information to the other pieces on the board, and the more pieces you have, the easier it is to add more information. So it should all link into each other, and that's the main point we want to get across. Like any puzzle, if you were to make one in a physical sense, you get all your pieces and you dump them on a table, and the first things you root out are the corners and the edge pieces, and you build the perimeter of your puzzle. And then you try and build it up from the outside in using those as your guide, and that's what we're going to try to do. So if you look to the corners, you're going to see ends with red circles around them, and that simply stands for nature. And anytime you're sort of dealing with a broad subject or a very complex subject, oftentimes just to get started, you have to get very specific with certain things, basically to build up your individual puzzle pieces. And you want to step back now and again and ask simple questions. And those questions are going to be, does that make sense? right? Does it make sense? And the second one is, would nature create a system that would actually do that? And sometimes you can catch yourself in wrong-headed thinking and get yourself back on track. So we always want those corners there, and we want to look to that now and again. Now, an example of that would be lactic acid up here. Now, most people know about lactic acid or have heard the word, and it's usually associated with pain, and it's usually the bad guy. Like, it's why you're sore after a hard workout, why you're sore the next day. And if you think about it, lactic acid gets sort of stockpiled, or it increases in concentration if we're working in an anaerobic state, right? So that would mean we're lacking in oxygen. And if you look back thousands of years ago, that would imply we're drowning, we're in a smoke-filled space, maybe we're desperately chasing after something or desperately running away from something, but it is usually going to be in conjunction with some survival event or some dangerous event. And what you want to think about is, would nature create a biochemical system, a metabolic system, that in a time of danger, in a time of survival, it would produce a noxious substance, right? And when we move through that, we'll get an answer to that question, and that's going to help us just sort of change the way we think about stuff. Now, when we look at the board itself, we have our edges to deal with. So our top edge up here is going to be our problem. Our bottom edge is where we're going to try to build solutions. On the left over here, this left edge is going to be what happens when our problem is allowed to persist or gets out of control. And on this side of the board on the right, this edge is going to be simple things that we know about our problem, right? That we're not really going to argue with, and that's going to be our start. And then what happens is we pick individual parts of the board, individual pieces, and try and build them into the center. Now, if we look at the board more specifically, we'll see pain is our problem. And the reason we're choosing pain, like we said before, is it permeates everything. So if we get a base understanding of pain and how it works and why it's happening, we could get into a lot of different subjects within the healthcare world. If we follow the arrows, we see soft tissue injury next. And most people understand that soft tissue injury is often a gateway to a chronic pain state. And we do understand that there's a variety of ways you can get there. There's emotional events, metabolic, stress-related triggers, and sometimes no sort of identifiable trigger at all. But we're going to use soft tissue injury as our first example to sort of bring the information into the real world, or your world. Right? Next, we'll see if we're in it long enough. Chronic pain, chronic fatigue are words that you will hear. And if you're in that situation long enough, you might get a label, and fibromyalgia is one of them, right? This is not a fibromyalgia site, but we're choosing fibromyalgia as our end stage problem because it's sort of famous, and there's a lot of criteria out there for it. There's a lot of symptomology listed in conjunction with it, and that gives us a big target to shoot at, to try and explain. So if we look at it, we see anxiety and depression. We see sleep issues, memory issues, increased conscious perception of pain, sensitization of pain receptors. We have digestive things, upper GI, lower GI, reflux and IBS, leaky gut syndrome. We also have our 18 mysterious tender areas or points, headaches, autoimmune and hypersensitivities. And as time progresses, respiratory issues, cardiovascular issues, and finally end-stage cancers. So that's our end-stage problem. And when you're looking with the specific fibromyalgia thing, a lot of times these syndromes are termed idiopathic, right? So we'll draw that down. And idiopathic simply means that it is of unknown origin. We don't know how it got there. And if we don't know how it got there, you can't legitimately treat it. So what you do is manage it. And that gets into that term pain management. And what happens there is as symptoms arise, if you get a variety of them, you get different names or different labels, but you are still being managed, which means we don't think it's going away. So as the symptoms arise, different practitioners will address them in isolation. And if you look at that list of symptoms, you could see 4, 5, 6, 7 different practitioners or trades all working on you individually. And that idiopathic term is almost like a barrier to getting out of that particular mess. So we want to sort of be aware of that word and what it means. Finally, on the bottom, when we look, we're looking for treatments. And we got 2 streams. We got a blue stream and a green stream. Green is lifestyle. And again, as the edge of our puzzle, we want it to be very simple, right? Things that we're not going to argue about. So in order to survive, in order to function, we all understand we need air, we need water, we need food, we need motion, and that's a big deal. And finally, we need rest. And under rest, we're talking about regeneration, regrowth, repair, maintenance, and healing, all coming under that category. Once we've sorted that out, all those individual puzzle pieces, we could start looking at physical treatments that are going to be administered by various professionals, various trades, right? So we want to know what the doctors are doing, therapists, trainers, gurus. And we use the term guru just to be able to include everything that's out there and new things that are coming out all the time. So we want to know what's going on out there as far as physical treatments. When we get to this side of the board, what we want to answer is what causes pain? What do we know causes pain? Simple things, right? So everybody knows extremes of pressure and temperature, caustic, chemical, environmental things cause pain. But whenever we're in a chronic pain state, a lot of it is sort of biochemical in nature, right? So we have biochemical mediators of pain, and we've listed 8 here. So if you look at that list, we see lactic acid, histamine, bradykinin, cytokines, prostaglandin E2, leukotriene B4, potassium, and serotonin are special guest stars. And we're saying that because potassium and serotonin usually aren't associated with pain, but when we look into them, we're going to get some interesting answers as to how we address our problem with them. Again, there's words in here that you're going to recognize, some you know something about, some a little. But again, getting back to that puzzle analogy, everything on this board will relate to everything else on it. And that'll sort of be our litmus test for validity, right? If we have something and it doesn't fit to all the information we've already put out, either there's a problem with all the information or a problem with that little bit of information. So again, that whole puzzle analogy should hold true throughout the whole process. So what we'll do is we'll pick anything from either side of the board, the bottom or the top, do a story about it in isolation, see if there's linkages, and keep doing that until we could link up the entire board. So just as a quick example, we're going to choose serotonin as our topic, just for this introduction, and see where it gets us. And again, we're picking serotonin because it's sort of famous. People know about it. So we're assuming it's new, and whenever we have a new topic, we want to ask some simple questions before we can get started with it. And the first one is, where is it? Where is it in the body? And then we want to figure out what's it doing there. What are its jobs? And then we want to figure out how much is there, if it's in more than one place. So is it a 50-50 split? Is there a whole bunch in one area and a little bit in another area? And once we know that, then it's valid to sort of start talking about it. If we just know one little bit, that's where we get into trouble, right? So we want to get that information down first. So again, serotonin, generally associated with anxiety and depression, so we could easily say it's found in the brain. So we'll just write that down. So serotonin's found in the brain, and most people accept that. Now, an area that it's also found that most people don't know about is in the gut. And when we say gut, just think about digestive tract, right? So the gut, digestion, digestive tract, stomach, intestines, small intestines, colon, and we just sort of leave it at that. And then another place that you find it is in the platelets. And if you remember, platelets are found in the blood. They have to do with clotting. An important point is they're very small, and that means they can get everywhere. They're sort of omnipresent in the body. And so there we have our 3 places, right? So as far as we know. So what do we want to do now is figure out the next question is, what's it doing there? What jobs is it doing? And there's lots of jobs that serotonin does. It's really interesting. We're going to cherry pick a bit. So in the brain, we already know it has to do with anxiety and depression. So it plays a role in moderating mood. So we'll just put mood up there. So it has something to do with mood. And it also has something to do with sleep. Right? So we'll put sleep there. And for sleep, it comes from tryptophan. So tryptophan's an amino acid. We got 2 reactions that's going to get us to serotonin. 2 more reactions are going to get us to melatonin, and that's that connection with sleep. Another thing that it plays a role in is memory. And most people don't know that one, but it does have a role in intermediate memory or functional memory, or the memory that allows you to get through your day. And then finally, it has the capability of decreasing your pain or decreasing your conscious perception of pain, taking the edge off a little bit. So those are all pretty cool things. That's all good news. Now we want to look to the gut. And again, we're not going to list all the jobs it does, but a major in the gut is it is a smooth muscle contractant, right? So it's involved with the contraction of smooth muscle. And when you think of the gut and smooth muscle contraction, think of the word peristalsis. And peristalsis is simply the churning, the mixing, and the moving of food. So think serotonin, gut, smooth muscle contraction, peristalsis, good digestion, right? And then finally we have the platelets. So the gut and the platelets are in the periphery. They're outside of the central nervous system. So we know outside of the central nervous system, it's a smooth muscle contractant. So it does that also. And if you think about it, the platelets have to do with clotting. So if we cut ourselves, it makes sense that the arterial walls with smooth muscle will contract a bit. We're going to decrease blood flow to the area of the wound, decrease bleeding, divert it elsewhere, and sort of reduce our blood loss. So that's a good thing there. The second thing it does is it will increase fibers. So it increases the fibrous buildup, or stimulates the buildup of fibrous tissue. The fibers integrate with the platelets themselves to form a strong clot so we could stop the bleeding. And that's a good thing also. And then finally, discharge from the platelets, serotonin will increase pain. Right, so it will fire pain receptors readily. And again, that makes sense, because if we've cut ourselves, we are taking a trauma, we want to know that we've hurt ourselves. And that's how serotonin makes its way onto this list over here, biochemical mediators of pain. Now, another thing we want to answer is how much is there? How much is in each spot? Now, when we look at the brain, that's where most people think of it. So when you ask, just lay people and practitioners alike, you're usually going to get a big number. And in my experience, anywhere from 70 to 100%. And the actual answer is about 3. It's about 3%, which is a surprisingly small number. And if you look to the literature, you're going to see numbers anywhere from 1.5 to 5%, and we're choosing 3. Right? So 3% in the brain. So pretty surprising to a lot of people. And then in the gut, where a lot of people didn't really think it was, we have a big number there. That's about 90%. And 90% is a very strong number in the literature. And if we're choosing these numbers, if we're going with 3% here and 90% here, that leaves 7%. And we'll just leave that at that, 7% in the platelets. So now we can actually look at this and sort of see if it's helping us out anyway. And if we look over to this other side, right, we see mood, sleep, memory, and pain. Mood, sleep, memory, and pain. We have digestive stuff here, digestive things over there. We have restriction of blood flow, increased fibrous buildup, and increased pain. Fibromyalgia, fibrous buildup within the muscular tissue, within the periphery. So we already see connections to this side of the board, and we're calling into question this idiopathic thing over here. Now again, it's easy to take something in isolation and make it look like that's the answer, but we want to stay away from that. So what we're going to do is we're going to rub out the board. I'm going to sort of draw it in a little cleaner, add a little more information to give you a better visual, and see if this is helping us in any way. So just give me a second. All right, so we've cleaned up the board. Let's just see what we have here. And what we have is sort of a simple stickman drawing of the serotonin story with a lot of information left out and a whole bunch of assumptions, right? So let's just take a peek. We go to the central nervous system in the brain, and we talked about that. And we decided that there's about 3% of the serotonin in the body found in that region. We also decided that it has something to do with mood, sleep, memory, and a decreased conscious perception of pain. Right? Now we're going to set up a scenario, and we don't know what that might be, but we're going to decrease the concentration or the amount of serotonin in the central nervous system. Now, as we're going through the course, whenever you see these square brackets with something in it, with a down arrow, that means a decrease in concentration or decrease of that particular stuff in that area. Now, if we achieve that, if we achieve a decreased concentration of serotonin in the central nervous system, we can assume we might have some anxiety and depression, some insomnia, decreased memory capabilities, and an increased conscious perception of pain. And what we see is if we're blowing through this idiopathic barrier here, and we're making some linkages to the symptomology at the top of the board there. Now, if we completely disregard that and go to the next region, we're looking at the gut. And again, we decided in the gut there's about 90% of the serotonin in that region. And when we think of the gut, we're thinking of the digestive tract. Now, the serotonin has different jobs, but the main one in the gut is a smooth muscle contractant. And when you think about smooth muscle contraction, you think about peristalsis. And when you think about peristalsis, you think about that churning and mixing of food. You think of moving it down the pipe, and that translates into good digestion. So it's absolutely essential for good digestion. And again, we're going to set up some scenario, and we don't know what that might be, where we get a decreased concentration of serotonin in the gut or the digestive tract. And if we can achieve that, we can assume that we might have reflux, IBS, leaky gut, or upper GI and lower GI problems. And again, you see us moving through that idiopathic barrier on these assumptions. If you look at fibromyalgia, specifically with regards to IBS, it will oftentimes be listed as stasis-based. And stasis-based just means things aren't moving, sort of a decrease in peristalsis. So again, another piece of the puzzle, right? So we disregard that. We go on to our next region, and we're on to the platelets. So within the platelets, we decided there's about 7% left if we are happy with these numbers. And the platelets had to do with clotting. A big point with the platelets is they're very small, which makes them omnipresent. They are everywhere in the body. And if we have a cut, right, we know they're a smooth muscle contractant. And when we think of smooth muscle contraction in the periphery, we could think of arteries, larger blood vessels, smooth muscular walls. So if they contract, we decrease the size of the pipe, so we restrict blood flow to that area, divert it elsewhere. And that's important if we have a wound. We don't want to bleed out as much, so that helps in the process, right? It stimulates fibrous buildup. So serotonin stimulates the buildup of fibers, so the fibers can integrate with the platelets and form a strong clot, a good thing also. Finally, it fires pain receptors, and that makes sense. If we get hurt, we want to know it, so we fire pain receptors. And again, that's how serotonin made it onto this biochemical mediator of pain list. So it readily fires pain receptors. So once again, we're going to make an assumption that we're going to be able to set up a scenario where we get an increased concentration of serotonin globally in the periphery. And if that happens, we're going to get ischemia or a restriction in blood flow aberrantly throughout our bodies. We're going to get increased fibrosis or increased buildup of fibrous tissue. right? Again, globally, and an increased conscious perception of pain or sensitization of our pain receptors or actual firing of our pain receptors. So that increased pain. And again, we see that move through our symptomology over here. So we have this large sort of movement of things through this idiopathic barrier. And that looks pretty compelling, but there's too many assumptions in there, right? So we can't say it's true, but it gives us a target. It gives us something to try and prove up. So first of all, these scenarios that we want to make have to make sense. They have to make sense within the concept of nature, our corners of our puzzle, and they have to coincide with each other. And what I mean is, it's easy to make up an isolated situation up in this area here and then move forward with trying to figure out a treatment. But this scenario here should match up with this one and this one, right? So all these things should be happening concurrently, and it should make sense. So if this is going down, this should go down and this should go up. And the scenario that causes this one to go up should have that negative cause on these sides also. So again, the argument or the solution becomes a little more difficult if we look at it in those terms. If we look over to this side of the board, we see as we go down the list, our first one is lactic acid. So if we rub this out, it's still a part of the puzzle. We're accepting it as an acceptable piece in the puzzle. So when we draw the lactic acid story out and discuss it, the scenarios that we sort of present to get this system to happen should correlate or fit distinctly in with the lactic acid story. It should make sense, and it should evenly drive through to the symptomology over here. By the same token, if we rub out lactic acid and go on to histamine, the histamine story should fit into the puzzle seamlessly. It should make sense. So the scenario we set up should fit with histamine, lactic acid, and serotonin in unison through all the different areas of the body to give us our symptomology on this side. And you can see the problem gets more difficult as we move through the list. So we have 8 stories to tell, and they all have to coincide with each other, because that's the true concept of a puzzle. Every piece cannot sit there in isolation, and every piece you add should fit seamlessly with all the others. If we can do that, we could start to say that this is true, and we could start to look at different treatments. If we look at our lifestyle choices, we should be able to create aberrations down here and see how they ripple through all 8 stories and how they impact the symptomology on this side. If you think of this as 8 numbers in your head, thinking of the complexity, you might be thinking this is like trying to win the lottery. And that's what most people do. Most people are looking for the magic bullet, right? They are looking for the magic drug that will come. They're looking for the mystical treatment or some berry hiding under a leaf in the Amazon basin. And it's just not going to happen. What you're going to find is some people do win the lottery. Some people win it in medicine, and some people win it in health, and some people win it as far as sort of just pure money in an actual lottery. But it's very rarefied. If you're looking at rich people, they get rich by finding nickels and dimes, working over a long period of time to achieve their goals, and it's the same with health. As we move through the system, we're going to find all kinds of positive things. Some things are going to be worth pennies, some things are going to be worth nickels, dimes, quarters, but you got to collect them all, and you got to move forward, right? And that's the thing. And then we're going to find all kinds of negative things, and they all compound upon each other. So negative things ripple through this system the same way positive things compound and give you good things on the other side. So what you're going to understand is the why of it. And that's the most important thing. You're going to understand why you're doing things, why bad things are bad, and why they ripple through the system in the way that they do. You're going to be able to understand what practitioners are talking about, right? And you're going to be able to ask good questions, and that's huge. That will allow you to become a part of your treatment, a part of that sort of journey that you want to take. So what you want to do is sort of think about that, look that over, look at the next video, and decide what you want to do.